Good evening. What's happening, YouTube land? I've been having so much fun chatting with you guys for the last 10 minutes. I almost forgot to start the stream. Oh, man. How's everybody been? Everybody have a good week? Productive week? Play around with some new toys, hopefully. Some drum samples, some gate plugins, you know, all the fun stuff. Just give me a thumbs up if we're coming in loud and clear here. Everybody can see and hear everything. Have a sip of my coffee while we get rocking. What's up, guys? Okay. 5x5. All right, here we go. Let's get into this. So, I don't know how many of you watched yesterday's Q&A that I did with Joel from Drumforge. Really excited to share with you guys, not only obviously now that it's finally out, Drum S.O.A.P, which is S.O.A.P stands for Sounds of Ambient Places, and then Arcus is a plugin that kind of coexists with S.O.A.P, but Arcus can be used for anything you want, really, and I'll show you a couple instances of that. But ultimately, the concept behind S.O.A.P, I'm going to go over this a little bit because some of you guys might not have seen the Q&A yesterday. But basically, the concept of Drum S.O.A.P is a library of mainly ambient samples. We included some close mic samples as well, just because we had the drums set up. We might as well get them as well. They're great sounding drums. Obviously, why not, right? But the main concept behind S.O.A.P is to provide a really massive, long, decaying ambient sample. And not just one, we wanted to give you layers, different mics, different round robins, velocity layers, all the usual stuff that you guys have come to know, especially from Drumforge. A lot of their libraries are top-notch, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to put this out with them and partner with them on this. Is they've just got such amazing drum libraries to begin with, and it's kind of a good path to follow in terms of how they've done stuff in the past. So ultimately, what we wanted to do was, instead of going into a recording studio and recording just obviously good sounding drums, like that, there's tons of great stuff out there. Lots of stuff that I use from Drumforge, from Superior Drummer, Slate, like all these companies have really great stuff. But the thing that I find is I don't want to say lacking, but just is harder to find, is ambient samples that aren't just a one shot or aren't just the room mics for these other sample libraries that we already have, that most of them were recorded in a sound studio, like a recording studio. We wanted to go to somewhere where we could get longer decaying sounds and bigger sounds, and really recording studios aren't designed to do that, because recording studios are designed to record music. They're not designed to record drum samples. So what ends up happening is you go to a recording studio, record drum samples. They sound good, but I'm always trying to make things bigger than reality and almost cartoonish, if you will. And so a lot of my workflow, especially when it comes to snare drums, I mean, this Drum S.O.A.P, we gave you snare drums, kick drums, toms, but kind of the inspiration behind this was mainly snare drums. And if you've heard anything that I've mixed or produced, you'll probably get kind of why we did what we did here. I was basically kind of making this for myself and hoping that everybody else would like it too. But ultimately, the idea was, instead of taking a snare drum sample or a snare drum recording and trying to somehow artificially make it sound bigger and longer and have more sustain and more decay and more width and all of that stuff, we kind of took an opposite approach, where we said, what if we went and recorded in really odd places that had massive decay times, almost like reverb chambers. And then instead of having to take a drum and figure out how to make it longer, let's do the opposite. Let's record these really long, massive reverb, sounding. They're not even reverb sounding. They sound like room mics, but bigger than any recording studio that you've probably been able to track drums in, and then figure out a way to kind of shrink them down as opposed to try to make them larger. So historically, ways in which that we've tried to make drums sound bigger, like you record room mics, right? And you put a compressor on it with really fast attack, really fast release. It all of a sudden makes the room, when you picture the room, all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, that's a big room that you recorded in, when ultimately maybe it's not. You don't get a lot of control over that scenario, but it sounds cool. It's a sound. And it also sometimes gets, the more you push it gets distorted. So that's the other problem. Most drum recordings that I get from other people to mix typically only might have one pair of room mics. The room might not have sounded that good. The drummer may have not been able to balance the dynamics of the kit, so it's all cymbals. So there's all these challenges. So then the next option that we've had historically is we go to reverbs, right? And some of my favorite reverbs are for drums are like almost, I mean, basically like the non-lin stuff. I love the non-lin on Deverb, right? The AMS is kind of like the obvious famous one. And then you've got, I mean, so many different ones. One of my favorite drum reverbs is the brick wall setting from the Lexicon 480. And that's a little bit of a non-lin, kind of just a random kind of short, almost short, like gated type sound. The problem with that is I find whenever I use those, it sounds like reverb on a snare drum, which that's what it is. And ultimately it sounds good. It's definitely a sound, but I'm always wanting, I love room mics. I love the sounds of snare drums and kick drums in room mics. So throughout my career, I've always been trying to figure out ways to really accentuate that. So I've done the tricks of, recording drums, setting up a PA system right next to the drum kit, routing the close mic of the snare and the kick and the toms, EQing the crap out of them to really excite the room, and pumping them through the PA system at the same time. So that way the kick, snare, and toms are way louder than the cymbals. And also you can EQ them to really excite the room. So you can add just a ton of low end or, whatever you need to do. I've done that trick. It's awesome. Like that's something I love to do. But again, you kind of lack a little bit of control. I find also when I'm putting room mics, when I'm recording like a drum kit, like a performance, when I'm setting up room mics, I'm typically not always picking the spot where like the kick drum sounds the best or the snare drum sounds the best. I'm picking the spot where the cymbals aren't destroying everything else. So when we go to record room samples, you can actually be a little bit more prioritizing the sound of that particular kick and snare sound with the room positioning, mics, all that stuff. You don't have to worry about what it's going to sound like as the whole beat's been playing. So anyways, sampling, as we know, gives us a ton of flexibility, gives us a ton of control. There's a reason why I love samples, and there's a reason why a lot of other people like drum samples. It just gives you a lot of awesome control and a lot of awesome options. But when it comes to just ambient samples, I've always wanted more. I've always wanted more options. I've always wanted more bigger. I've always just wanted different rooms, different sounding rooms, different kind of, I don't want to say delays, but different lengths from the kit. And so we went down this road, and we recorded these quite a while ago. And when I say we, Andrew Cruz, who's another amazing engineer that we partner on a bunch of projects with, he was my collaborator on this project, and a lot of the concept really got refined by talking this through with him, and he came up with a bunch of great ideas on how to really pull this off. And ultimately, he's the one who found these locations and got us into these locations, because these are not. I don't know what he told people. I don't know how we got in. I don't know if they knew we were recording drums. I didn't ask questions. And so we went into 4 different locations, and I'll kind of go through them in a second here. And we basically set up great sounding drums, tried out a bunch of different mics, bunch of different positions, and we were able, because number one, because we were just sampling, we were able to only worry about what it sounded like one hit at a time. Number two, we didn't have to worry about cymbals, right? We could put the mics anywhere we wanted, knowing that we could always adjust some of, like, let's say, like the delay. Like, for instance, in one of the locations, we had the mic so far back that it was almost like a little bit of a slap. And you would never put the mics there if you were recording. If you were recording like an actual performance, you would never would have put the mics there. In context, in real time, it didn't sound good. But I knew we could move them, and the sound at that particular spot in the room was just so perfect for whatever, that snare, that kick, the way the room was getting excited. Ultimately, it just gave us a lot of control when we were recording. Another thing that I did talk about with Joel was some people were thinking that this was an IR situation where we went and shot IRs. We didn't shoot IRs. We thought about that. We contemplated it. I've done that in other rooms before. That used to be one of my drum room tricks. I used to set up a measurement microphone, an Earthworks Omni like measurement mic, and then I would feed that through IRs that I had captured at other studios or other IRs. And sometimes I was using this concept by doing that. And I was putting that mic through an IR that might have been like a cathedral. So it was like just crazy long. And again, you can start bringing stuff down and shortening the decay and stuff like that. You can change the tone a little bit. But the way that IRs sound in a room is different than the way a kick or a snare drum sounds in the room. And the other thing that's different about IRs versus this is you wouldn't put the mic in the same spot if you were shooting an IR, because you're not actually hearing the drum in the room. So for instance, with an IR, it just shoots a tone, right? And so you're going to just kind of pick a spot. Maybe you set up a mic, maybe you set up a drum and you kind of hear it and you're like, yeah, let's kind of put it there. And then we shoot it. But ultimately, the other thing that I found with IRs is the room doesn't react the same way. The way that the frequencies bounce around in the room it's not always apples to apples. So anyways, we kind of, unfortunately or fortunately, we went through the painstaking process of just velocity layering, multi-snare drums, round robins, and we really wanted to make this a very complete bundle of ambient samples that if you're mixing and you just want to make it sound big and cartoonish like I do with a lot of my stuff, well, then you've got some tools to do that. If you are recording drums in a bedroom or a living room or a small studio, but you want a big sound, well, then you can trigger S.O.A.P and basically give yourself that a little bit of that kind of sonic palette, if you will, of having that. So, yeah, so that's kind of the concept behind this. And obviously, you probably already know that if you're watching. A lot of you have probably seen, some of the marketing and seen some of the ads or seen some of the Q&A stuff that we've done. So you probably have kind of already got some of that. So tonight, we're going to dig in a little bit further. So the first thing I want to do, and I'm going to get to questions in a second, but the first thing I want to do is we are going to go to my friends at Drumforge. Okay, Drum S.O.A.P. So this pack is called the Historic Bundle. It hopefully will be more. We've got a few more locations planned. The goal was to always keep doing them because each room sounds a little different, if not a lot different. Just being able to keep it fresh. I don't like using the same stuff all the time. So, like I said, we kind of made this mainly for me, and might as well share it with everybody else and get it out there to everybody. And so anyways, this is the Historic Bundle. We call it the Historic Bundle because a lot of the locations that we recorded at were quite old buildings. So when you buy the Historic Bundle, it comes with the 4 libraries of samples, and I'll dig into what exactly that includes. It also includes Arcus, which is the plugin that we developed to basically control these like chaotic, out of control, massively long samples. So again, we'll get into that. So the different locations we recorded at, there's one that's called the Foundry, and this was I think this building was like 150 years old. It was a foundry way back when, I think in like the late 1800s. I could be wrong on the time, but it used to be a foundry. The building's been there forever. It eventually got redone into it. Now it's kind of like an art gallery, as you can see in some of the pictures. Like there's there's art on the walls. They use this for events, various things. But it's a really cool building because it's although the room is kind of square. You can kind of see a little bit up in the top here, and I'll see if I think Andrew's got a ton more pictures. We'll publish some pictures maybe on socials over the next like couple weeks. So it's actually 2 stories high. So the above, you can kind of see a little bit of these rafters here. It's open above that, and then there's a balcony that looks down on this whole thing, and then there's a big long hallway that goes to like the front door. So the inside, I believe the floors were like polished concrete, I think, and then plaster. And so it's interesting because it's funny. This was Joel's favorite when we first started like talking about this together. I sent them over a bunch of samples of kind of like what this was going to be, and this was Joel's favorite snare ambient sample by far. Joel Wanasek from Drumforge, he's an amazing mixer himself, and so he was using this in his mixes. And he didn't know like what the room was. He didn't know what it was. Like didn't know where it was or what the dimensions were or anything like that. And when I eventually told him like what this room was, it's like everything's parallel, everything's reflective. Like no studio designer would ever build a live room like this ever. It's so wrong, but yet it sounds so good. But again, it sounds so good because we had the ability to sample it. A live drum kit playing beats in there, it's probably going to get a little too washy and crazy. So that's where it's great. It's great having a bunch of samples that are recorded in awesome studios. But when you're recording one drum at a time, like that's a limitation, in my opinion, that I'm like, let's not limit ourselves. Let's go to somewhere where we can take advantage of the long, washy, just crazy, slappy reverb situation because we're only recording one drum at a time, right? So that was the foundry. The hangar, this was probably one of my favorite. The hangar was, it's literally an old aircraft hangar, small little like regional airport in Connecticut. And the guy who bought it turned it into a vineyard. So there's vineyards out on the property. And then this building, same thing. It's like an event center, but as you can see, back here, they also are making the wine in this room. But people have weddings here. They do big, corporate events, stuff like that. Again, big open space. And this was one of those rooms where we got the mic so far away that it's like this would be unusable in context of a live kit. But we ended up recording some of my favorite sounding samples, and then in post-production we just push them up a little bit so you don't have this weird slapback. So that was a really cool one. The chapel, this was also a really cool one as well. I think this chapel was built in like the early 1900s. It's all open beams, open rafters. You've got this cool, the ceiling's not arched. It's like a vaulted ceilings. But just tons of wood. The floor was carpeted, but you get a lot of reflection off all the wooden pews. So it was kind of a very interesting sound that I actually thought this room was going to sound a lot bigger than it did. And ultimately, like the way that this one diffused, really warm, cool sound. This one had some really, really cool options as well. And then the livery here, which this was actually used to house horses, same thing. It's like we're repurposing. People are repurposing these old properties for various things, but same thing. People would use this for events as well. And this one was cool because above the rafters here, it was completely open as well. So we were able to place some mics like right up at the peak of where the peak of the I'm spacing on what it would be. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, like we were able to get mics placed in spots in this room because we had to crawl across the rafters and make sure we didn't fall through. But this was also a really cool room as well. So, anyways, those are the 4 spots that we went in and recorded all of these samples. And when we recorded the samples, we did close mics on everything. A similar concept to if I was recording a drum kit, for a band. One of the really cool things that we supplemented this with, which was the first time I did it, this was Andrew's idea, was a stereo XY on the bottom snare. He knows I love wide snare drums, like wide sounding snare drums, like not just everything straight up the middle. And so I don't know if I don't know if he came up with the concept or if he heard about it, or he's an awesome engineer, so he might have come up with it himself, but he suggested doing an XY in the bottom so that only like the high frequencies of the snare rattle go like left and right. And it's really cool. I will do that on every drum session I will do for the rest of my life. It's so awesome. So full credit for that one, Andrew. That was killer. So yeah, we did that. The other cool thing that was nice, because we're sampling drums, we don't have to worry about a drummer playing and banging mics. We can actually position mics in such a way where if they sound better a little bit further away from the drum, then we can put it there because we're sampling. And so with the tom mics, my favorite tom mics are the Shure KSM 32s, but they're big condensers. So number one, they're hard to fit in and amongst a drum setup when a drummer's playing beats. Number two, they're not the best in terms of like cymbal rejection and bleed rejection. So you get a lot of cymbals, you get a lot of the other drums in it. Not the best, but sonically, like the curve and the pickup pattern of kind of what it's accentuating and just the overall sonics, like that's what I want a tom to sound like. So we were able to use KSM 32s on everything and position them in such a way where we don't have to worry about cymbal placement. We don't have to worry about a drummer getting around a drum kit doing fills. We put them where they sounded the best. And then when we started doing room mics, the concept was we were going to do 3 sets of, I forgot the overheads, but we did overheads as well. And I do a left, center, right thing with the overheads, and then I print them down to a stereo track. I've been doing that for a long time. It probably gives the most accurate picture of the drum kit while still really accentuating the cymbals, which is what I want. I know a lot of people's, the overheads for them is like, oh, that's the kit. That's the balanced sound of the kit. I want cymbals to be pretty dominant in the overheads. And so the microphones that I use are the Earthworks SR25s, I believe. And I do this left, center, right thing. And it also kind of cockeye the stereo image, like placement of the mics in a weird way that actually puts the snare drum in the center. And ultimately it gets the mics, the left and the right mics closer to where kind of most drummers are putting their kind of main crashes. So anyways, the room mics, we wanted to do 3 sets of stereo and 2 mono options. And just to give you an idea, when I go to record a live drum kit, I typically do a similar type of thing. The close room mics for me are kind of that balanced kit sound that a lot of people like to get from the overheads. I don't get that from the overheads. I try to get that from the close room mics, where it's just kind of like, yep, it kind of sounds like you're a balanced overall recording of the kit. The middle room mics, that I want to kind of sound like, okay, I'm not playing the drums, and that's not what the drums sound like while I'm playing it, which the close mics might sound a little bit more like that. Now I want to sound like I'm in the room. So maybe if, the guitar player's on the other side of the room, what he would be hearing if he didn't have headphones on. And then the far rooms, I'm like, okay, like no holds barred. Let's make these like just, I don't care if they sound fake, like almost, again, cartoony. So the far rooms for me are always like as big and as wide as possible. Like that's like the excitement of the room mics. And then the monos are really cool because those for me, I use to kind of shape the overall timbre of the kit. And so using a mono room mic that's kind of distorted or that's really overly compressed, that type of thing can be really effective. That I don't want to say not a lot of people do. A lot of people used to do it. Like that used to be the main room mic, used to be just a mono room mic. Now everybody goes super wide, and I think a lot of people kind of forget to fill in that middle section with something that's kind of ambient, not just all the close mic stuff. So anyways, we tested a lot of different mics. We tested a lot of different positions, and ultimately what you guys are going to hear tonight, and if you purchase the drum S.O.A.P samples, is what you're hearing. And like I said, I'll try to find some documentation and some pictures about of these sessions, so that way we can start like posting some stuff online, because there's some pretty cool documentation type stuff that we did that I think would be interesting now that the beans are spilled and you guys all have my tricks. So before I get into Arcus, let me just have a quick look at the chat here. Okay, what do we got here? Hello, everybody. Okay, looking at the chat. Natural raw reverb versus digital reverb, basically. Yeah, and I wouldn't even call it reverb, because like a reverb chamber, I mean, it's probably the closest like analogous thing is probably like a reverb chamber. But again, the reverb chamber is putting the snare drum or the kick drum or whatever through a speaker to get it into the room. So it's still not the same thing. So that's why this is a little bit of a, I don't want to say like a new concept, because it's not. I mean, people have been recording drum samples and they've been recording ambient samples for a while. But I guess the purpose of this is to replace, I mean, to me, a reverb on a snare drum has always been a substandard solution for the problem of not having a clean room mic far enough away with a decay shaped the way that you want. Like that's the problem a reverb fixes, but it does it in such a way that unfortunately it's actually not, it's not even a matter of real versus fake, but it doesn't have the same sound. So this is just an option to a reverb. So yeah, it's a raw ambience as opposed to putting an algorithmic reverb or even a chamber where you're pumping the snare drum through a speaker into a chamber and then miking it, right? So everybody's pimping your favorite reverbs. Yep, absolutely. Oh, thanks, Mike. You bought the first sample pack. I'm assuming that the Drum Shots one. Yeah, that's pretty fun. I'm actually going to use some of those in the session that we're going to open up tonight. Chris, could you do a video on how to set up slate trigger on very complex snare tracks? Yeah, maybe I'll do that. I'm assuming you mean complex by like lots of hits and fills and ghost notes and stuff like that. I'm thinking maybe tonight's video, seeing how I'm triggering stuff, how I'm triggering S.O.A.P, and then also how I'm triggering Arcus, and how I cut triggers for all of my sessions when I'm mixing. Maybe once you see that, you'll realize that actually it's not that complex. You just kind of have to do the work of cutting yourself a clean trigger. So, what's up, Mike? Yes, no kidding. Snare in the center of the overheads. What a concept. I hate off-centered kicks and snares. And although you are going to hear them in the sample pack, I do my best to center the kicks and the snares as much as possible in all of the stuff. So yeah. Chris, did you find any small rooms that had strangely long decay times? Not small rooms. I've recorded in like foyers of houses which aren't that large, that, let's say they have lots of tile. The problem with the problem with small rooms is you don't actually get the distance. So you get lots of slap and the sound bounces around and you can get long reverb times. But how do you get the mic to not then also get all the early reflections if you're in a small room? So again, I'm not an acoustician and I don't really know a ton of the theory behind this, but I'm assuming the reason why we were able to get the sounds that we got was because there's no early reflections. It's all the sound once it like arrives at the mic 100 feet away. So it's almost like turning the early reflections in the reverb, the reverb unit off. And I know some people do that, or you can balance that out. But again, it's like the reverb units just don't, they always sound like a reverb on a snare as opposed to a snare in the room the reverb is trying to recreate. So anyways. Tom, like the idea of the overheads, get a better picture of the kit. Can you describe how you are placing them, or all the same distance from the snare? Yeah. So they're all the same distance from the snare. And instead of looking at the drum kit like straight on, you almost have to picture the drum kit like on top of the drum kit. So I'm trying to think of how I can explain this. Basically what I do is, if you're looking at the drum kit from like bird's eye view, like draw a line through the middle of the kick drum and the middle of the snare drum. So one line that basically intersects the middle of the kick drum and the middle of the snare drum. That's like your center line. And then what I'll do is I'll find like a perpendicular line. So perpendicular like that. And I'll kind of find where that is to where it's kind of in line with the cymbals. So ultimately, instead of having the mics, I'm trying to get the, instead of having the mics like above the kick and the snare, like, you know, let's say like that, it ends up being kind of like that. And so ultimately it puts the snare and the kick in the middle, but everything else stays in the kind of like the same stereo spectrum that you would if you were looking at it. It's just like almost like you're looking at it from a weird angle. But ultimately, when you hear it in headphones, it sounds almost the way that it looks. So maybe I'll find a picture, or I'll do a diagram or something so you guys can get an idea of that. Ultimately, it's not that important, but for people who are recording and want to try that out, yeah. And then you measure the distance from the snare drum, kind of the spot between like the snare drum where it's closest to the kick drum, and find the spot. There's a lot of trial and error, because getting it all the same distance and then also getting it placed to where the stereo image is proper, and then also to where you're picking up the cymbals the way you want. There's a lot of trial and error. But once you get it set up, like it's incredible when you just solo the overheads and you get them balanced the way you want them just on their own. You're like, that's the most accurate kind of stereo image that you can get from overheads. Usually like the snare's off to one side and one cymbal's not getting picked up that much, and all, you know, that kind of thing. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, I'll figure out a diagram for you guys. Okay, I said I was going to give away some shit. Let's give away some shit. Okay. Everybody get ready. Get ready on your chat there. I'm going to ask a trivia question for those of you who may or may not know me or what I like or what I do. Okay, here we go. First of all, in order to qualify for this, I need you to help me. Take a screenshot, take a selfie of yourself watching the video or watching the live stream tonight, post it on your socials, tag me, tag Drumforge. Okay, that helps us kind of keep this live stream going. So in order, if you get the answer right, the first person to get the answer right, who's also done that, qualifies. All right, here we go. Okay, although we're talking drums tonight, I'm going to go to guitars for a second. What is, if I could only use one guitar amp for every project for the rest of my life, what would that be? Let's see who's quick to the draw. Quick to the draw. Manufacturer and model. Quick to the draw. Who's there? Oh, this is interesting. This is, Arcane. V45. You were so close. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it is the diesel VH4. Everybody knows. See? Oh, Grant, CB4. I like it. That's an interesting twist. So the CB4 is my plug-in version of my VH4. So, okay, you know what? I think, Arcane, I think VH4 45. I think that was a typo. Sorry, JR Oz. I think I got to give it to Arcane. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Arcane, shoot me, DM me your email address, and I'll hook you up with the Drumforge guys. Get you a copy of the Drum Soap historic bundle. That was an easy one. So, okay. All right, now we're going to go to the second part of this the second part of this crazy thing that we're doing here. All right. So now we recorded these massive samples, and like I said, I was doing this before we recorded Drum S.O.A.P. So I was kind of making my own crazy long samples. Like I said, PAs, pumping sounds into rooms, compression, reverbs, reverb chambers, IRs. Like I was kind of already doing this, and then I was using a variety of noise gates. Triggers got a little bit of like envelope control. It's very cumbersome, but you can do it. So I was using as kind of cobbling together a bunch of different tools to then be able to shape the ambience into a track. Because if you've got a track that's, let's say it's like a 6/8 mid-tempo, doom doom do ga do doom doom do ga do right? That's completely different snare ambience than if you're like a, you can't have that big long tail carrying over in the fast song the same way you would, let's say, like the slower song. So that's why reverb units have, the reverb time, right? You can change it from 2 seconds to 0.7 seconds or whatever, right? But the thing is, sometimes you don't want it to just kind of decay. Sometimes you want it to stick around for a while and then have a quick decay. That's kind of like the gated reverb sound, right? It's like full on and then hard cut, full on, hard cut. Sometimes you want it to decay quick. Sometimes you want it to decay quick, but not completely decay out all the way. You just want to lower the sound of the ambience after that first hit comes in. So there's all these things that I've always wanted, and that I'm always trying to do, and I'm always trying to figure out new ways to do it. Ultimately, the guys at Drumforge, when I told them my crazy idea of how I use these insanely long samples, they're like, yeah, we can do that. We can build that. So we built Arcus. And basically what this does is it gives you control. Anybody who's used a synthesizer, like every synthesizer has an ADSR. ADSR stands for attack, decay, sustain, release. And it's basically, it lets you shape the envelope of a sound. So when you hit the key, or when the drum hits, or when Arcus triggers, do you want the sound to start right away, or do you want it to ramp up? Once it hits a certain point, then what do you want to happen? Do you want it to hold at like full level for a little while and then start to decay? Do you want it to start to decay right away? Do you want it to decay all the way down? Or do you want it to decay down a little bit and then kind of keep like half level for a little bit longer? So there's all of these things that an ADSR will really let you tweak and ultimately have full control over. So gates, there's lots of awesome drum specific noise gates. There's obviously there's ADSRs and synths, and some synths you can actually run signal through and use the ADSRs. But then it's a matter of like, how do you trigger them? Slate Trigger has a kind of a simple version of this in it, but I find it cumbersome to use, and it doesn't give me all the controls that I want. Ultimately, the thing that really mattered to me the most was I make music, and when we're making music, we're talking bars and beats, and that's our value, right? When I say value, like that's our time value. That's our tempo. It has to do with bars and beats. Milliseconds are like whatever. So when you're setting a gate, or when I'm setting an ADSR, or when I'm setting, the reverb time or whatever, like 2 seconds, like who cares? 2 seconds. What's 2 seconds? I don't care about 2 seconds. What I do care about is a quarter note, or a bar, or, a dotted 16th, or 3/4 notes. That a half note. That's what I care about. So one of the main principles of Arcus was not only just building the ADSR in a way that it could be used for drums, but was also making it usable within the realm of musical values and musicality. And ultimately, that's what we did. So there's a cool video here that kind of shows a bunch of stuff. I'm sure all you guys have been on the site already. So let's pop a session open and dig in. Let's do that. How about that? Okay. All right. Really quickly, I'm going to play here. Make sure we have audio. You guys let me know if we've got good sounding audio here. Cool. All right. So let me give you a quick overview of what I got going on in the session here. Ultimately, this is probably what most of you have probably... Too quiet? Okay, thanks. I'm going to crank it up here. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, hopefully that's better. Just don't want to blow up any front ends of converters or any of that fun stuff. So, okay. So what I did here is I just printed some stems of this song. And then we've got the drum kit. I've got the drum kit here. And the drum kit, I've already got samples in the drum kit. Like this is kind of like a little bit of a stripped down version of... I think I removed plugins and stuff like that, or I think I committed plugins. Anyways, this is kind of like a very basic, just kind of drum balance from what this mix was. But there's already samples and everything in there, so I'll just solo those drums for you here so you can hear them. Okay, so. All you guys probably have got sessions with multi-track drums, so don't need to dig into that. One of the things I do, and somebody asked me a question about how I use trigger, and so for every mix that I do, I cut sample triggers, okay? And ultimately, these ones haven't been cleaned up yet, but basically what this does is it allows you to only get just a little snippet of the kick drum. Let's say that, this is the kick drum. So I just duplicate the kick track and I just make sure each little snippet is that's the only thing that's in it. So I didn't finish cleaning these up, but you basically get rid of anything that's not a kick drum, right? Okay, cool. Then what we do is you keep that on its own trigger track, and now you can use that to use on trigger. And when you're using trigger, you just turn the, not the sensitivity, sorry. You turn the detail all the way down. And that way you're getting the very first little snippet. You get trigger triggering right then, and you don't have to worry about any snare drums or anything else. Or even sometimes like with toms where there's a lot of low end, sometimes it like double triggers, which is why they have this re-trigger pad. But ultimately by cutting a trigger track and then just placing, pulling the threshold on your triggers program all the way down, that's basically solving that problem. So hopefully that answers the question a little bit. Okay, and I'm gonna actually clean, you know what, I'll do that later. Anyways, so let's dig into Arcus a little bit. So people have asked, how do you use this, right? Like, do you load all the samples in Arcus? Do you what are the files that come with Drum S.O.A.P? So when you buy Drum S.O.A.P, you obviously get the plugin, so you install the plugin, all the major DAWs, like that whole thing. But you also get then the samples here, and you've got the 4 locations. You've got PRS files, which are preset files for slate trigger. You've got TCIs for each mic, for each instrument, for each mic. So you've got your kicks, chapel kick. We did an in and out, a far. I did a compressed kind of process track. You got all the different rooms. So you can grab those one by one and bring them into slate trigger, okay? Then what I also did, because I find browsing samples in Trigger is a pain in the ass. Like, I hate having to load a preset in order to hear it. So what I've done this with a lot of different libraries just on my own, even though they're not my libraries. I've just done this for my own sake, so I gave them to you guys as well. Is I also included a folder of one-shots, and these one-shots correspond to the preset files. So there's a preset. Let's go back to the chapel really quickly here. So there's a preset here that's chapel kick huge. Okay, it's huge. And then you've got a one shot here, chapel kick huge. So that's what that's what the preset's going to sound like if you load it. Just, it's a really easy way. You can use these one shots all you want. If you want to load them into like battery or something else, sampler, or just drop them on the grid, like you can totally use the one shot waves for whatever you want. But the real value of the one shots for me is being able to quickly audition the one shots to find which thing I want, and then I'll go and find the PRS preset folder file. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so that's so basically you install the software, download the samples, put the samples wherever you're going to use, wherever you keep your samples, and wherever Trigger will find them. So let's do that first. Let's ignore these two samples that I have up here for now. So you know what? Let's just do this from scratch. Let's just clear this track for a second. Okay, we're going to get rid of these. Well, I'll keep that on there for now. We'll just bypass it. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to set up a track. I like to duplicate a track. Don't try to put this on your kick track. Duplicate your kick track and then have like a S.O.A.P track. Okay, so let's put slate trigger on here so we can load up a couple presets. Yep, that's fine. Fine with that. Okay. And so I'm going to go to the browser. I have all my stuff organized by manufacturer, developer. Okay, so we're going to go into, let me bypass Arcus for a second too. We're going to go into Drumforge. And here's where you can use the one shots to audition. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention, I had a couple questions earlier about this. In the presets, which also correspond with the one shots, people have asked, there's a chapel kick AMB. AMB is ambient only. So this is like, doesn't have any close mics mixed in with it. The ones that don't say AMB in brackets, those have it's kind of like an overall preset that you could use like to pretty much be like your sample sound, right? It's got a pretty great sounding, just overall. It's obviously still going to be ambient because that's what drum soap is, but it's going to have the other ones pretty, like the dry stuff in there mixed in pretty good. So it'll be like a nice balanced preset. So for instance, here we'll use right. So that's got a healthy dose of the kick in and out mic. And then when you go to the ambient stuff, it's got less if not no close mic stuff. So that would mainly just help supplement maybe an existing sample or an existing, yes, Trigger does have a gate in it. Can you put a gate before Trigger for the S.O.A.P track instead of editing each hit? Yeah, you can. The only problem is it's like you don't have control over it. Or, I mean, you have control over it, but if the way you set it works for everything except for one section of the song, or for me, the goal with any of these kick trigger program or drum trigger programs, and this was even back when we used to do this with a audio suite plugin called Sound Replacer. For me, the goal is always to be able to drag the threshold all the way down, and that way it's triggering the sample as quickly as it can because it's getting the very first part of the waveform, number one. And number two, I can cut the trigger and I can look at it and make sure it's triggering in the same spot every time. I can clip gain it up. I can gain it up or down. Like you have full control when you have a trigger track. It takes a little longer. I use macros. So use your sound flow, use your Stream Deck, use your keyboard, Maestro, do that. Everybody's got a different way of doing this. And there's a bunch of videos out there on how to do it. Some people use what's called key spikes. Some people use tab to transient and then just paste like a click. Everybody's got their own way of doing it. Figure out a way, build a trigger track. That's just a trigger. You're not listening to it. It's just used to trigger stuff. The other thing that's useful for is you can use that to trigger gates on all the live stuff. So if you want to set your noise gate on your snare to get rid of the hi-hat, well, you don't have to mess with the threshold using the audio from the snare track. You can use your snare trigger and it will just open at the same time every time. So the idea is to be able to pull the threshold all the way down. And so if you use a gate, yeah, you could probably get pretty close, but that's now you're relying on the gate being perfect. And I have yet to find a gate that is perfect. So actually the gate that's perfect is the one that I cut. that's the perfect gate. So anyways, back to S.O.A.P and Arcus here. So all right, we're on kick. So here's the chapel kick. And let's for now, let's only use the ambient stuff. Okay, so that's the chapel. Let's hear the foundry. Okay, hanger. Okay. Okay, I'm going to listen to this track really quickly and just kind of hear what are we dealing with? What kind of sound are we after here? So in my brain, like while that track's playing, I'm hearing boom, 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 boom. So I want something low. I want something that definitely has some length to it. And so I think, let's go back to here. That might be our winner. That's a little too high pitched for me. It's not boomy enough. So I think we're gonna go hanger. So now that we've picked our snare, because we can, or picked our kick sample, we can now just go to that preset and load it. So let's go to, what did we pick? We picked the hanger, kick. I think it was the big. We'll start there. Okay. So we're gonna load that up. Now there's no way, as far as I know, there's no way to audition a preset. So that's the problem with, I don't want to have to load this thing and then listen to it. It just takes forever. So the one shots is a cool workflow. While we're waiting for that to load, there we go. Okay. And so like I said, a trigger does have this ADS, or they call it an ASR. Actually, I can link all of these here. They've got an ASR, but it's not, to me, it's not really that useful for most things. I have built in a little bit of noise, or of kind of envelope shaping into some of the presets, but now that we have Arcus, we don't need that. So I'm just going to let this go full bore. Okay. It's a little crazy, right? Okay, now let's make it even bigger and boomier. Okay, so I added a bunch of top, carved out some low mids, added a bunch of lows. Always check your phase to make sure you're in phase. Compress it a little bit more. Like, you can go crazy. Make it crazy. Okay, so now what we're gonna do, like, that's too ridiculous. It's too long. It doesn't really fit the track. It's cool, but it's kind of obnoxious. I mean, yes, it's loud, but it's also just a little obnoxious. So here's where Arcus comes in. Okay, here's our creation. And now I'm gonna give you guys a really in-depth tour of this, so bear with me. We're not going to go straight to like finished product here. I want to kind of walk through what the options are. So when you're dealing with Arcus, obviously you put it on the track of the sound that you want to then shape. So we're using this with S.O.A.P right now, but I'm also going to show you a way you can use this with white noise, where you can use it with a synth. You can use it with a guitar if you want to make like a tremolo effect. Like just you can use this. There's so many different ways. I can't wait to hear how you guys decide like what you're going to do with this. And I know you guys are going to use this in ways that I never even imagined, but let's concentrate on S.O.A.P for now. So it's on my trigger track. I've got these big boomy samples going crazy, right? I've excited them with the SSL channel strip, added a bunch of EQ, squashed them even more. And now I'm left with Arcus on the back end of that. So after all that stuff. So you can trigger, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this. When you're setting up Arcus, the ADSR is triggered by one of three things. Okay, so when the ADSR starts and goes through its process, it goes through, you know, the attack, decay, sustain, release. We need to tell it when to start that process. There's three ways you can do that. Number one, up here, you can just select audio. So what that's going to do, like a noise gate on any other plugin, or a noise gate on any other track, it's going to use the audio from that track and you adjust the threshold to make it start doing its thing. And I've actually set the decay really short so we can hear what it's doing. There we go. Hang on. I got to bring the threshold down. Okay, really quickly, here's a perfect example. If you ever hit play and you're like, I don't hear anything, it's probably because your threshold's not down. It's not actually quote unquote opening. All right, here we go. Okay, so I'm using the threshold to kind of set it to where those big ambient boomy samples, I'm setting it so when it exceeds a certain threshold, the ADSR starts. The problem with that is, number one, the S.O.A.P samples are velocity layered. So if we get to a quiet part in the song, you're going to have to automate this or change it or whatever. The other problem is because these are so big and boomy, and I've also squashed them even more, the threshold is kind of hard to set because you can hear how you're getting, like, it's staying open too long because the threshold is so low. In order to get it to open at the right time, I've had to set the threshold pretty low, but then the sustain of the drum is also triggering it. So it's not the best, but you can use this on any track and just use the audio on the track like you would a noise gate, okay? So that's a good place to put it, but the minute that that kick drum gets quieter, then all of a sudden your threshold changes and it's going to adjust your timing. So the second option that you guys are probably pretty familiar with is something called sidechain. Okay, so for a sidechain, you can, and that's what this SC stands for. Up here in the key input, you can select a different audio signal for Arcus to look at in order to base its processing on not the actual sound processing, but when to start the process of the ADSR. So in all of my sessions, I have something called I have a bus already set up called kick key, and that's basically just a send that I can send whatever I want to it. So I'm gonna have my kick trigger over here. I have a pre-fader sending to kick key, and now I've got that track going to the side chain of Arcus. I'm going to clean up this. I'm going to clean up my my trigger track here really quickly while you guys are talking hockey. I love it. Okay, so there, now I've got that cleaned up a little bit. So we'll just use this spot. So now, because that's the only thing, these little snippets are the only thing that's being sent to that kick key bus. When I go back up to Arcus and I select sidechain, I'm gonna hit play here real quick. You see these little snippets up here? I can bring the threshold all the way down. And if you click this little speaker, you can monitor the sidechain. So we'll monitor those little snips. Okay. So now, like that the ADSR is starting as quickly as possible. Like the minute that little spike happens, it's opening and starting the process. Okay. So that's the second way of triggering it. The third way is triggering it via MIDI. So kind of like the sidechain option, you have to have a MIDI track. And obviously this is a little janky because I didn't clean it up, but let's clean it up real quick. I don't particularly love Pro Tools MIDI, but whatever. We'll do this as quickly as possible. And all I'm doing is basically this is just mimicking my trigger track. Somebody play the Jeopardy music. Okay, here we go. All right, so now that MIDI track, I route to Arcus. And when I go up here, I select MIDI. Now you're seeing those MIDI spikes. And there's no threshold because it's either seeing MIDI or it's not. So my preferred way of doing this is actually with MIDI. You just got to make sure your MIDI, however you derive your MIDI triggers, it's lined up with your kicks, right? Or if you're programming drums, you've already got MIDI. This is the perfect way to use it. So route the MIDI to your MIDI track, have your kick trigger MIDI track routed to Arcus, and select MIDI here. Okay, so those are the three ways to trigger it. So once that section up here is kind of dealt with, right? This is kind of like your side chain trigger threshold. This is kind of determines when the ADSR is going to start here. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to start playing with the ADSR controls. This is where things get pretty fun. I think the default setting is milliseconds, and if you hover above the knobs, you'll see it shows milliseconds. Milliseconds are great for fine tuning, but for the most part, I stay on BPM. Okay, and what this allows me to do is instead of giving me milliseconds, this is basically, not basically, it's absolutely giving me note values. So so like I said, when I was playing the track in my head, I was hearing boom, 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 boom. So I'm hearing the kick drum sustain being pretty much done by the time that snare happens, which is on the 2. So I got a quarter note. So I got a quarter note for the kick drum to occupy. Okay. So now we can get this a couple different ways. Let's get it the first way. Let's just set the decay for a quarter note. Doesn't sound overly natural. That's like super big gated. That's kind of like a gated reverb trick, right? Doesn't sound super natural. So now we can start doing a few other things to really tweak this. So if we like that overall sustain, we can just add a tiny little bit, a 16th note triplet of release. And that's just going to ramp down. You can actually zoom in if you want. That's just going to ramp down the end of this kick drum sample. Okay, still not exactly what I want. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to shorten the decay and lengthen the release so it's a little bit more of an even release on it, okay? So let's bring that down like that, and let's bring that out like that. And now I've got a quarter note. Okay, so now we're getting better. I feel like the timing is working better now. Now my only problem is I feel like the sustain is too loud. So one of the things that we're going to do now is we're actually going to, we know that that's kind of the decay is where we want where we want the release to start happening is right at this point here. We're going to roll the decay back a little bit, and we're going to increase the sustain time and then drop the level a little bit. So effectively what this is doing is you're getting kind of like a nice healthy dose of like loud reverb, and then it kind of gets quieter, but it doesn't start fading out, and then it starts fading out. And you're like, just like I said, the control that you have over this envelope is very tough to do on anything else. And if you can do it on everything else, it's hard to do it to like a musical beat value, and it's hard to do it fast and quickly in kind of a simple one plugin solution. So any questions in the chat so far about kind of what Arcus is doing, how to set it up, just how to kind of route things to get it working? Because I think there's a little bit of I don't want to say a learning curve, but maybe there is a learning curve. It's because this is a little bit different than most things that are out there. I have had a few questions from people who are very experienced, just kind of not really being like, how do I set this thing up? So I'm going to go to the chat, kind of look over here for a second, see who's talking hockey here. Got a Flames fan in the house. I was actually born in Calgary, so I can get behind that. The kick reminds me of the bridge section of Living on the Edge. Oh, dude. That's one of my favorite sounding albums. That's one of my favorite drum sounds. So that's a huge compliment. Thank you. Yeah, it's funny that you said that, because when I think of big roomy kick drums, like that's the first thing I hear in my head is like Living on the Edge. That whole album has a really, really, really great drum sound that has been a huge inspiration for a lot. Yeah, for sure. Oh, Eric Kane's giving away S.O.A.P. Oh, he already has it. Okay. Well, I mean, that's very generous of you. Okay. Well, Eric Kane, whoever you give it to, you got to let us know now, so that way they can DM me later and I can hook them up. Using MIDI for triggers. Yes. So typically what I've started doing now is I do audio triggers and MIDI triggers. And so I'll cut the audio triggers so they're perfect, and then I'll derive the MIDI from that with the threshold all the way down. So the MIDI lines up pretty good. Excuse me. But yeah, for having both is amazing, because then I can also trigger like Superior Drummer very easily. I can trigger Battery. It's really nice having the MIDI. Yeah, I think I might be getting Arcus at some point. Definitely. Come on, man. Yes. Yeah. The Arcus is cool. I've used it. I'm going to actually show you guys a little bit. I've used it for like just like not sound design stuff. Well, I guess sound design stuff, but literally you can use it on any source you want. So you can put this on a guitar and then just trigger in like build in a trigger track that's just like beeps. Beep, 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 beep. Beep, 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 beep. And you could mimic a kill switch on a guitar. So if you've got a big distorted guitar, you could put this on it and have it go gang, 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 right? You can do that. You just have to build the trigger track to tell it so it knows what to do when. So yeah, it's a lot of really, really cool options. The Pump album sounds great. I mean, those like late 80s, early 90s Aerosmith albums were huge inspiration for me. Huge. Get a Grip to me was, I mean, I love Pump, but Get a Grip to me, like sonically was so good. So good. Yeah, but Love in an Elevator, the drum sounds like, come on. Cool, Mike. Yeah. And by all means, like when you guys find out different ways to use this, like do some social media posts, like share the love, show us how to how you're using it in different ways, just make sure you tag us so I see them. So I can't wait. Can't wait to see some different ways. Okay, Chris Dover, Chris Under. You are getting the Drumforge prize. Okay, so Chris, you got to DM me. DM me once we're done, or do it now through Instagram or YouTube or whatever. Just shoot me a message. Okay. What else we got? Full-time audio engineer. I'm broke. You know the drill. Yeah, I know. Well, that's why we try to do these like early insiders discounts where it's like half price and stuff like that. I think you can still get it for pretty cheap tonight, but I totally get it. Yeah. Well, I've got another prize tonight. I do have another prize. We're going to do one more trivia towards the end, so you still have a chance. So I rep my Nespresso machine, man. I definitely... That's what I got here. I got my Nespresso in here. It's a little cold now, but all right. Let's get back to it. Okay, so that's how you set it up. That's how you kind of quickly use it, right? Pretty basic once you understand the concept. So now we're going to get into a little bit more like advanced stuff. So Stormio, love that. So now we're going to get into a little bit more advanced stuff where once we had this done, and I was like, dude, you just like made my life so much easier. When I say, dude, the Drumforge guys, they made my life so much easier by taking this concept that was in my brain and putting it into what we're now looking at. I said, okay, well now there's a few other things that I think would be helpful because once you start doing this, a few things, once you start bringing in these big boomy samples, a few things start to happen once you start gating them down properly. The first thing that usually happens is there's too much low end, or there's too much top end, like with the snares or whatever. Once you start kind of getting these ambient samples and you start squashing them down, or you start shaping them down, well then you can turn them up more. And then when you start turning them up, well, then the context is a little different. So I wanted to build in a couple little simple EQ tools. So that way you can, we've got a tilt EQ, we've got a high pass, we've got a low pass, and we've also got a phase invert. So always be checking the polarity. This is something I mentioned in the Q&A with Joel. When we were doing the S.O.A.P libraries, we optimized the polarity of all the different like TCIs here. Mute that. So we optimize the polarity of all the different layers. But once you start changing the balance of certain, like once you start maybe turning up the mono mic a little more, or the kick the far up a little more, certain frequencies start to kind of cancel, and there's no such thing when you're talking about mics that are 50 feet apart of each other of being like in perfect phase across all frequencies. So it's a little bit level dependent. And there's also for cancellation, it's 180 degrees out of phase. Well, there is such thing as 27 degrees out of phase, and there's such thing as 74 degrees. Like there's all these in betweens, right? So depending on the level that you are setting and the blend, could change the optimization of these polarity settings. So if this isn't a right or wrong, this isn't like, oh, that's in and that's out, and oh shit, they all need to be in or whatever. Just use your ears. Pick what you like sounds best, because sometimes a little bit of phase canceling in like the low mids can actually be a really powerful tool. So as you're adjusting things, as you're adjusting balances, always be just like turning these phase polarity switches on and off within trigger. And then even then beyond that, when you're actually like listening in context to your track, and make sure you're always doing that. So that's why we put this here. So that way, as you're adjusting this, and as you're adjusting this, you can quickly, you don't have to bounce back and forth out of this to another plugin. You can just check the polarity within here. So Let me make sure I got my loop going here. I'm going to do something really quickly here. Give me a second, please. Change duration. Thank you. It's weird, missing a couple kicks, but whatever. No worries. Oh, I know why. Trigger's not getting them. All good. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to copy and paste all of my triggers up onto the kick S.O.A.P track. And now I can do what I told you guys to do. Bring the detail all the way down. Boom. And I like to turn the sensitivity up. All right, here we go. Okay, so if we turn on the EQ, we can use the tilt. And some people have said, why can't I just use an EQ after this? You totally can. What ends up happening, this like from years of doing this kind of processing, what ends up happening is the kind of like the timbre of the drum seems to, like the sample seems to almost change as you start shaping it down. So for instance, like maybe the decay doesn't have as much bottom end as the initial attack does. So if you EQ it when it's like full frequency, you'd EQ or full length and untouched by the envelope shaper, the EQ might not necessarily be what you would end up once you start shaving down some of like the big boomy low end that carries on too long. Once you get rid of that big boomy low end that just seems to carry on forever, you actually might want to boost some low end, whereas you wouldn't have done that before. So again, the tilt EQ is really quick. It's like a tone control. If you turn it this way, it's gonna basically raise the low. Well, let me do this the other way. Raise the low end and tilt the high end and vice versa. So it's kind of one of these things. Really quick and easy. And then the low pass and high pass, I mean, that's all pretty obvious in this day and age. Same thing, right? And then the other thing that we added for you, because once you start filtering out and EQing and getting the polarity right, you may also need to adjust your output, right? Okay, so anyways. So you've got your EQ there. The next thing I want to show you guys is, let me pull up. I'm going to pull up one option here. I'm going to over accentuate the bottom end even more. All right, this is just silly, but let's do it anyways. Okay, I'm gonna reset this. All right, so you guys are hearing how woofy that is. One of the things that I am, well, let's call it a tendency. I have a tendency to, I like drums, shocker. I like drums to sustain until like the next hit. I like the tonality of the drum to almost like fill the space, for lack of a better term. So instead of just going duh, 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 I like duh, 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 right? I like it to fill. Same with snares. Ga, 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 not ga, ga, just the music I like, the sound I like, right? But what happens when, especially with kick drums, what tends to happen is the low end can just really wreak havoc on a mix if the low end is lasting that entire sustain or that entire ambient like gap, right? But then when you start rolling off the low end, it rolls off the low end for like the hit part, which then makes it sound kind of thin and weak. So one of the things that I struggle with, and I've found a couple tools to help with it, but I wanted to build it into Arcus, was I wanted a way to control the timing of the low end separate from the timing from, like, I don't want to say the high end, but I wanted to have kind of a crossover point where I can have a shorter decay in the low frequencies and then leave the rest of it kind of decaying as long as I want. So that's what this multi-mode does here. So what multi-mode, so when I clicked multi-mode, you can see our settings from before, from our wide mode, get mimicked over here. And then we've got a crossover section here, and everything underneath, so right now it's 1500 hertz. Everything below 1500 hertz is going to get this treatment of envelope shaping. And then everything above it is going to get this treatment of envelope shaping. And you've got your solo and your mute buttons, so that way you can listen to them individually. You can bypass, so you can just like leave the everything above that frequency alone. Like, don't do any shaping. Just let it ring as long as the sample goes. Same with the low end over here. But for this scenario, we are going to try to make the low end not be obnoxious, but also not get rid of all the low ends. So that way, when the kick hits, you do have the impact of the low end. So let's play around with that a little bit. You know what? I'm just going to start in solo, and I'm going to bring down the output of this a little bit. You're already hearing it. All right, so let's find the frequency of the low, where the low end is getting a little, like where that ooh is kind of happening. And I do that by bypassing the right side and soloing the right side, and then I just keep scrolling down on the crossover until I start hearing that like really muddy, woofy low end. So let's do that here. We'll start up here, and we'll solo this so we can hear it. Let's crank this up a little bit. It's right in there. And then once you find that frequency, just go a little bit above it. So that way, when you solo this. Okay, and I'm going to actually, let's unsolo that. I'm going to let this out longer so you guys can really hear how obnoxious this is. So that low end is just too much, right? So what we can do now is we can solo the low end and just make the low end only like the low end just hit for a split second, just when the kick drum hits. That's it. Okay. So let's go to a pretty small, and then we just got to give it a little bit of a release so it doesn't clip. Maybe a little bit longer so it's a little more natural. Love that. So now when we play it together, you'll hear the low end still hits when the kick hits, but then the low end kind of disappears, but you still get the rest of the frequencies of the room mics on that kick drum sustaining through the rest of the hit. So here, let's listen to that. So let's hear that in the track. So I'm going to actually bring that crossover up even a little bit more. I want less low end in the sustain. Okay, so now the high end is still hanging around a little too long. So let's turn that on. And let's just shape that down a little bit as well. Okay, so really quickly, I'm going to give you guys like an on and off so you guys can just hear the whole thing here. Okay, so here's what Arcus sounds like on the, or let's do S.O.A.P without Arcus. And then with Arcus. See, it still sounds like a big room, but it's not, now it's not like unwieldy, right? You've got control over it. It fits the tempo of the song. It's just, to me, that is night and day. Like, I probably wouldn't have been able to use that sample on its own. I would have put that sample on, said, it's too long, it's too big, it's too boomy. But ultimately, I would have gone to something that's not as big and boomy, and then I would have been struggling to make it exciting, and like you start chasing your tail. So this just gives us control over that. I saw, Jordan, you mentioned that the crossover sold me. You know what? I'll tell you this. This is a little anecdote. I think somebody asked me this in another interview or another Q&A or something like that. A mix that I think a lot of people have really come to like, and I've got a lot of positive feedback, is the Nickelback San Quentin mix. And right before that song went to mastering, like literally I think an hour before, I'm like, okay, they're mastering, I got to get all this stuff uploaded. Ted Jensen mastered it, and I was just doing some quality control, making sure, like listening through the files, making sure everything was good to go before I sent it. I'm like the kick's just a little too boomy. Like there's something about it, like the low end, it's just clouding up the low end. And I can't remember which gate I pulled up, but I pulled up a gate or a multi-band, something. I did something where all I did was had that like frequency from like 40 to like 120 just kind of get pulled out quicker. So it's just clamping down on that and and almost taking it away. But it was so hard to find the sweet spot of where it's like, now I'm not wrecking the kick, but it's solving the problem. And an EQ didn't do it because it wasn't, I didn't want that frequency out of everything. I just didn't want that frequency to sustain. And it was hard to do. And honestly, this would have solved that problem. All I would have had to do is turn this on, just use the crossover with the left side, the low frequency, and just set that so the low frequency just gets gated out a little sooner, but the rest of it can sustain the way it's supposed to. I didn't have this back then. I wish I did, but now that problem is super, super easy. And it also works in the other way, right? If we're talking about a snare drum that might have some annoying top end, maybe you don't want the top end to stick around as long. You can kind of do it with the opposite scenario. So, something I haven't really talked about at all. You can use Arcus on whatever you want. You don't have to use Arcus on drum S.O.A.P. You can use Arcus on your own drum samples. You can use Arcus on room mics. That's actually a really cool use for this. Put Arcus on room mics and then trigger it from your snare top mic. Your snare top and your kick, trigger this. So that way on the kicks and the snares, you can control the envelope of your room mics. Really, really cool trick. I might even, depending on, well, we're already an hour and a half. I might not get to that, but anyways. I want to play around with the snare. So let's just kind of tuck this in a little bit. Okay, so here's a perfect example. So right now that I'm hearing this in context, I want a little more top end overall, and I want a little less bottom end. So now I can turn the EQ on. So here's another good example. With the polarity not engaged, the polarity switch not engaged, it's a more like substantial sound, but I kind of like the frequencies that gets cut out with with the polarity switch in. It kind of scoops the kick in a really nice way. So I'm going to leave that. Okay. Couple quick questions. Think you could use these on toms? 100% you could use these on toms. Absolutely. Absolutely. We also did tom samples, and the tom samples sound really awesome. The rooms on the toms, awesome. Again, you got to cut triggers though. It's so hard to set anything threshold wise for triggering, for gating, for any of this stuff. It's so hard. So I cut a trigger for that as well. So let me clean up my snare trigger here. Okay. All right. Okay, let's jump to the snares here. Okay. Okay, you know what? We already showed you. And actually, you know what? We'll do this on snare, and then I'm going to show you how I use this on just an already printed sample, and maybe we'll do the room mic real quick as well. So, all right. So here we go. Let's load up. Let's load up trigger. We're going to run through the whole routing. The whole routing kind of mechanism here again. Okay, so I've got, let me copy up my cleaned up trigger up to here. So I can drag the threshold all the way down, right? Okay, and I'm going to cut this trigger as well while we're on it. Okay, all right. All right, so here is trigger. We're going to go, and we're dealing with snares. Okay, so Drumforge, S.O.A.P samples, historic edition. Let's check out our one shots and see, because we did 3 different snares. Got to turn audition on. Okay, so we did 3 different snares. We got a BB, probably Black Beauty. P is probably Pearl. VP, I think, was the Vinnie Paul. So let's just quickly pick which one we want to go with. It's the Black Beauty. That's the Pearl. Okay. That was the Chapel. Let's hear the Foundry. Like that one. Foundry Snare L. That's probably a Ludwig. Okay. Foundry Snare L is probably my favorite so far. Okay. Ooh, that's nice. That's nice too. Ooh, that's nice. That's a little trick I use. I'll let the track play and I'll just click the audition in time with the track. Okay. I like the hanger. I think the second one I thought was pretty good. Let's hear the livery here. Like that one. Okay, snare Q in the livery or hanger. I think it was CP here. Nope. one more Foundry. No, okay. All right, let's go to the livery Q. All right, so let's go Q. And now that we've found the one shot that we like, now we have to go and use the PRS file, which is the preset file that I built for you guys. And that was Q huge in the livery. Shotgunny as hell. No kidding. I love that. Okay. How are you guys doing? Everybody sticking with me? Anybody's mind melting yet? I've been contemplating all day. I'm like, how do I simplify like this concept? And I don't know if I've done that, but I think ultimately once you get it, it's pretty like once you kind of like get your head wrapped around it, I think you'll probably be all set. So that was the goal of tonight. 11:30 p.m. I need another coffee. Stormio or Mexico? Oh, Stormio for sure. Okay, what's going on here? Slate Trigger takes forever to load PRS files if they're not in like the Steven Slate drums folder. And if you've got samples all over the place, it takes forever to load. Okay. So now I'm going to go get rid of any curves that I built in. Doesn't look like I did, but let's just, yeah, I don't think I did here. This is all default. Yep. Okay. All right. And then because I'm using my trigger, we can bring the detail all the way down, sensitivity all the way up. Okay, another thing, if you guys don't know trigger, there's this little dynamics knob here that can just have like the velocity layering and well, the level of the velocity layers and also like just like the output level be less dynamic. And then obviously also you can do the same thing with the velocity. So it triggers the louder notes if you crank this up versus more of the quieter notes. So. Okay, let's get to work. Okay, so I'm going to squash this a little bit. I'm going to make it sing even more, just sustain a little bit longer. All right. Okay, now we're in good shape. Let's go. Fire up Arcus. Okay. So I'll turn it on. Basically, you would instantiate Arcus at this point. Pull this up. Now we have to make a decision. How are we going to trigger this? Okay. Are we going to trigger it by the audio from the S.O.A.P sample that Slate Trigger is firing? Are we going to trigger it by the side chain, which, like I said, I've always got that set to kick key or snare key? Or are we going to go MIDI? So, like I said, I find MIDI to be like just kind of the no-brainer, easy. It's on or off. There's no threshold. The minute that MIDI note happens, the ADSR here within Arcus is going to start to run through its process. So let's use MIDI. And then let's make sure my snare MIDI track, which is down here. Let me get this. That's what this is down here, is routed to Arcus, and it is already. So this is where you would route it. So it would be on Arcus, which is on my kick S.O.A.P track right there. Okay. Sorry, snare S.O.A.P track. Okay, so now Arcus happening. One of the things I like to do with Arcus, like soon as I start, I just like to turn the release all the way down. Remember, I switched to BPM, turn the release all the way down, and then I'll bring the decay to where I'm really hearing it doing something, like the gated reverb thing, right? And then you can start letting the release out or start letting a little more decay out. And you can start kind of just playing with the balance of how much sustain or how much decay, how much sustain, how much release you want to kind of fill the musical gap that you want. Okay, so here's exactly the purpose we built this multi. The minute I start playing with this, I want the sustain to be longer. The minute I make it longer, that annoying kind of like 240 to like 300 hertz is just, there's too much. There's too much. I don't need it. So that's when I'm going to turn on the multi-mode. Solo the right-hand side here. Right in there. So here, when I switch to wide and it applies the same envelope to both sides, here it sounds kind of choked. And then if I make the decay longer to make it not sound choked, you kind of get that, too much of that. So let's put this back. Okay, now we're going to tuck it in a little bit because now it's obviously pretty loud. Okay, we're going to do a quick A-B with, now that I've kind of optimized the snare with Drum S.O.A.P and Arcus, we're going to turn on and off S.O.A.P so you can hear the A-B. Here we go. Ready? that to me is the way that I want to hear drums. So it kind of does that thing. Obviously, we've been listening to everything really loud, so everything always sounds good. You're like boom, ga boom, right? But then we start bringing it down and tucking it in, and even like the kick, like I almost stopped like processing that the kick was big and ambient when we were working on the snare. And then when you turn it off, you're like, holy shit, like the drums are really dry and short without these samples. So I'm hoping that people like will learn to incorporate these like in a tasteful way. And a little can go a long way unless you're looking for an effect. But ultimately, it's like it just brings some realism and some width and some depth to a otherwise maybe short, tight kind of small drum sound. So the other thing that I was kind of mentioning was like you can use this on other things. So I'm going to show you one really easy, quick thing that you can do. Okay. Hopefully you guys are wearing headphones or speakers. I've got a sub bass here that I just printed. Can you guys hear that? Hopefully you can. Here, I'm going to do one other little thing here to make it speak in the computer speakers a little more. Okay, good. Sure you guys can hear that now. Okay. All right, so I'm going to put Arcus on that, and I'm going to have it open up just for the kick drums. And what what I use this for is what I'll do is I'll program a sub synth that follows the root note of the song throughout. Doesn't have to follow what the bass guitar is doing. It just follows the root note. So every time the kick drum is, this is a hip hop or an R&B trick. I don't know if you guys listen to a lot of hip hop or R&B. I don't, but one of the things that I love about it is a lot of the time they use, every time the kick hits, there's a sub of the root note of the song also hitting at the same time. So as the root note of the song changes, the pitch of the kick almost changes. So you can use that. You can use this for that trick without having to go and like program a kick or a sub matching up to the kick. And also you can then use Arcus on the back half of whatever. So instead of having to make that sound and commit to it, and now you're kind of stuck with that MIDI, you can just have it follow whatever the kick drum pattern is, or whatever you want to trigger it with, right? So let me throw Arcus on the back half of this for a second. I'm just going to copy the Arcus that I had on the kick drum, and I got to trigger it from the MIDI. And if you hold Control, let's Arcus, boom. I'm definitely not going to rap for you tonight. Okay, we're going to do one other quick kind of sound design thing on that as well. I've got some white noise here. Okay, I'm going to copy the snare drum Arcus, and we're going to route the MIDI to that. Okay, let's go back to wide. We're going to shorten this guy down. Let's take off the EQ. So adding this white noise to the snare drum, let me just mute some other stuff. If let's say you're doing you've got a sound where you just want it brighter, like you want some little kind of top end air, but adding top end EQ is not doing it, or you don't want to put another kick sample or another snare sample or something like that. Just adding this little like white noise trick where every time the snare hits, you just get this little tss, tss of white noise. Yeah, something to play with. Anyways, just trying to give you guys ideas of how to use Arcus. You can use it for a bunch of different things. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of Q&A. Actually, I'm going to do one other quick thing, because I actually wanted to try this. I wanted to hear what room mic I have on this drum kit. It's not bad. Okay, I'm going to squash the shit out of this, and then we are going to use Arcus to trigger it. Okay, there's that. Okay, so we've got, let's put Arcus on this. Okay, we are going to trigger this via MIDI. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my kick MIDI. I'm going to route this. I'm going to hold Control so I can add a track. We're going to go room far. And I'm also going to do the same thing on the snare. Room far. So now both the kick and the snare should be showing up on Arcus here. If you see the little dot. Cool. Okay, here we go. Set it to BPM. I think I'm going to have the Drumforge guys just have this default on BPM. Like, that's such an important thing for me. Like, that's a step that doesn't need to be there. Maybe you guys disagree, but all right, let's hear this. So that sounds a little too like crazy in terms of just like, it's like cutting in and out, but here's a cool thing that you can do. Instead of having it kind of go silent in between the hits, we can use it almost like an expander where we can just bring down the level of the hits between the hits, or the level of the audio between the hits we can bring down. So there's that. I think on that, this will probably be on my room, like my room mic bus from now on, because just being able to leave the hits loud, the kicks and the snares and the toms in the room mics loud, and then kind of suck down the stuff between them in a musical way. This is all pumping with with tempo values, right? So, man, it's cool. I'm getting ideas for like just workflows that I probably haven't really even implemented this in yet. So this is kind of still new for me. This plugin has been a huge undertaking, but yet it's here to provide like a simple solution. So it's kind of a little bit of a weird oxymoron. So anyways, there's Drum S.O.A.P, there's Arcus. Let's open this up for questions. And then I got one more trivia question that I'll give away one more bundle here before the end of the night. So what do we got for questions? Anybody need any clarification on anything? Anything that I kind of blew over too fast? Let me go to the chat here. All right. Oh, somebody was asking earlier about how do you get the MIDI from your audio triggers? I use Massey DRT, which is really quick and easy. I did see somebody here saying something about the Superior Drummer version. Yeah, the Superior Drummer Tracker also works pretty good. Just for me, within Pro Tools, the workflow is not as elegant. There's a little bit more like saving, importing, like it's not quite as elegant unless I don't know how to do something that you can do with it. But yeah, Massey DRT for me is kind of the clear winner. And I find, again, like with Massey DRT, so I'll just show you something really quickly here while we're doing this. So let me pull up Massey DRT. So let me scroll over for you guys. So anybody who's used this, typically, so if I use let's say I use the live kick drum like that. Okay, let's use this, right? Analyze. So you have to select the threshold here. See how it's getting rid of, oh, sorry, guys. Here we go. Was anybody going to tell me? Yeah, thanks, guys. Got it. I'm back. Anyways, with Massey DRT, so I'm using the live kick drum here to get a trigger. When you hit analyze, all these big hits are the actual kick drum. So you've got to use the loudness meter or the loudness slider here. And then you can kind of fine tune it over here. But I think ultimately, like that's kind of where it is, right? So you've got to basically put in scenario is when you can just leave the thresholds at its maximum level. So the tracker is pretty good. The SD3 tracker is pretty good too. But yeah, DRT is for me is the one. Somebody said it almost sounds like 1176 compressor on it. I'm not sure what you were referring to because that was a while back. But yeah, I mean, big drums, right? That's a perfect tool for it. Night and day difference. Cool. You know what? It's like there was a big question mark as to, I'm like, are people going to be able to like really hear what this is doing? And it's when you're playing around with it, it can be obviously when you're soloing big ambient boomy mics, you're like, oh wow, that's crazy. But when you're just supplementing a drum kit and you're just tucking all this stuff in, that's when when it's subtle in the context of a song, that's when you can really understand the power of this. Especially because, you know what, a lot of people don't have access to big rooms, and a lot of people don't want the stuff sounding fake, which is what you get when you just when you put the whole thing through a reverb, or you take the room mics and then try to or the overheads and try to quote unquote re-mic them through some of these kind of like re-mic reverb plugins, which are kind of like IR based players. this is just a different thing that to me is more usable, more realistic. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't care if it's real or not. It just sounds the way that I want it to sound. So hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, lots of creative options for this are, like you said, they're kind of endless. There's a lot of things I haven't even thought about using this for. Ultimately, being able to trigger it from MIDI, you can use your MIDI keyboard to play in beats over top or patterns over top of other sounds. Like I said, the first thing that I thought of when I started playing with this was having a kill switch on a guitar, which is cool. And I used to do a lot of that. We had a couple guitars at the chop shop. I think Tommy Lee had a couple guitars with kill switches like 20 years ago. Now quite a few guys have them, but being able to do that after the fact and be able to program it with MIDI is, to me, even cooler, because then you can always make sure it's in time and you can stretch it and really fine tune it to get it to be the way you want it to be. But yeah, you can use Arcus for that, and it's going to be great. So, okay. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, let's do one more round of trivia. Get to know your live stream host, or do you know your live stream host? Okay. All right. This one might be a little bit of a guess. This is this is a little bit like inside baseball. But here's the question. There's an album. Let me think of how to phrase this. And then I want the album. I don't want the band. Well, give me the band and the album. But I got to grip you just straight to it. No. There is a documentary of the making of an album that is probably the most influential thing in my music career. It basically, watching this made me want to produce records. What's the band and the album that documentary was making that record of? Chris Dover, you got it. Metallica Black Album. All right. Well, Chris, you already got the, I think you already got the earlier one gifted to you. So I think we're going to give the other one to Mr. Mike Wood Music Production. So Chris, you got I'm pretty sure you got the other one, right? If you didn't, you get it. You'll get it. So anyways, guys, DM me so I can get your email addresses, and then I'll have the Drumforge guys send you a little gift pack. So, okay, any more questions? Is everybody asleep yet? If you haven't already, obviously, I think most of you guys have subscribed. I like seeing kind of similar names here. This is great. I love doing these things. I want to keep doing them as often as I can. So the more you guys show up, if you guys keep showing up and keep participating, I'll keep doing them. Just do what you can to help me spread the word, and we'll keep rocking these together. So if there's no more questions, contest winners, contact me through maybe Instagram. Probably the best way. DM me on Instagram, and I'll get you guys hooked up. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys sticking with me for this for another long episode here. And all right, we'll see you next week or the week after. I'm going to try to do it next week. I can't guarantee next week. If not, the week after. I'll try to get another one or two in before we get to Christmas. So. All right, guys, thank you so much. Take care, stay safe, be healthy, have fun. Go to drumforge.com if you don't already own this, and at least check it out and see if it's something you might be interested in. So thank you very much. We'll see you guys later.